Mr. Ricketts really does define gumption and grit in every turn of his endeavors. We all know of his success in business, TD Ameritrade, DNA Info, American Film Company, but his sense of taking life to its fullest doesn't end there. For a more formal introduction, I would like to introduce Mark Kinner from First Interstate Bank in Sheridan, also a Wyoming leadership graduate, as you hear so many times at these. So let Mark have the mic.
Thank you very much, Paul. Greetings all. I have a two-question survey that I would like to start out with. How many of you think that entrepreneurship is important in Wyoming and in the United States? Please raise your hand. Okay. Next question. How many of you think that creating opportunity is important in Wyoming and in the United States? Okay, great. Well, I'm here to share just a couple of things about how Joe has used his entrepreneurial spirit and how he's helped to create opportunity for many of us. And so imagine for just a moment that you're growing up in Nebraska City, Nebraska, and that in 1968 you graduate from Creighton University with a degree in economics. And then you start out your professional career with Dean Witter and with Dun & Bradstreet, and you think, and somewhere along the line, you're bitten by the entrepreneurial bug. And somewhere along the line, Joe recognizes that he could maybe do it better, and so co-founds First Omaha Securities with a loan of $12,000. I was very disappointed to learn from Joe a few minutes ago that that was not a loan from a bank. It was from family and friends. But so the TD Ameritrade story begins, and through a series of mergers and acquisitions, and with the recognition that technology would play a role and create an opportunity for perhaps small investors to play along with the big guys. And so it goes, and we know the rest of the story with TD Ameritrade. Joe, earlier I learned that we have quite a few folks here who are TD Ameritrade customers. Oh, and so, yeah. So then after 35 years, and Joe retires and turns the reins over of TD Ameritrade, but being an entrepreneur, he just could not retire to his ranch south of Jackson, about 35 miles, Little Jackson Hole. He couldn't just retire there and take up the reins of his Percheron 6-horse world champion horse team, but he wanted to continue with several ventures, and Paul mentioned a couple of those ventures. There are two that I would like to mention. One is High Plains Bison that he continues to work with, and I'm guessing that came out of a love of watching buffalo grow on some of his ranches, but also seeing an opportunity to share with a very healthy meat. But also I learned that his interest was also in helping to preserve and protect our natural grasslands by also cultivating bison that were very responsible for those for many, many, many centuries. So that being one, and then also a family venture through a trust. Family purchased the Chicago Cubs in 2009, but I think that Joe personally probably saw that as an opportunity to sell bison dogs at Wrigley Field. Is that correct? So again, opportunity. But one of the things that Joe is involved in that really struck a chord with me was the fact that somewhere around 2005, he was on holiday in the Serengeti in Africa. And he meets a gentleman by the name of Shangi Wilson, who in his spare time is spending everything else that he has to start a school. being an entrepreneur and seeing this as an opportunity, that led to the formation of the Opportunity Education Foundation, which I'm happy to hear just minutes ago is growing and doing great things. Now in 11 different countries, sponsoring about 1,000 schools with over 500,000 students, and quite a contribution, recognizing the opportunity and wanting to help make a difference. And so, again, entrepreneurship, opportunity. I would like you to join me with a warm Wyoming welcome for our neighbor and friend, Mr. Joe Ricketts.
Thank you, Mark. That was a very nice introduction. You mentioned my ranch, and I'd like to ask if you folks know about that show on RFD TV about ranches. I'm going to be featured on that Monday night. I don't know what time here in Wyoming, but I think it's really kind of exciting for me to have my ranch featured. And I'd like to thank you all very much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be among you. And this is my first time at the Wyoming Forum. And you picked a good year to have me here, because it's just a few days, 9 days after the election. And I guess it's enough time to recover. And I hope some of my comments this afternoon, which are going to be conservative in nature, are not going to be offending to anybody. I tried not to go too far. But it's my style to be in the Wyoming type of frame of mind and not go too far one way or another. Two very important things happened in this last election. One was the rise of the PACs, and I don't think party politics will ever be the same. And the other one was the populace of the United States voted to take us from a free enterprise society to a welfare society. And a lot of people disagree with me, but I think we're forever going to be changed. But however the votes had it up in the last election, I had the same basic thoughts with respect to what I was going to have in our conversation this afternoon. Plan A was to frame matters in a hopeful context with a new administration, maybe even a new Congress, primed ready for major reforms. The general idea would have been to preview what would start in January as the moment we've been waiting for, a moment when this nation's serious financial problems can have some serious addressing. That was Plan A. Of course, and I sure wasn't counting on Plan B, but as it turns out, that's the hand that we've been dealt. And after the election of 2012, we with the same challenges: $1 trillion deficits, debt surpassing $16 trillion, and a system of entitlements that threaten our entire economic system. And we all have concerns about these, and we have pretty much the same cast of characters that we've had for the last 4 years, so our concerns have really been kind of elevated. I know nothing in President Obama's last 4 years that will help him in the second term get some of these things done, so I'm really praying and hoping very hard. What we did on November 6th was see the need for folks like you and me to make ourselves heard on the great questions that are in front of our country at this time. Until very recently, I had never really been much of a political guy. I'd never been involved in politics. I'd always kept to myself. I'm quite busy with my own businesses, and I travel and work on my foundation. I really was not too involved. And of course, I live in a state where you can be removed from the political drama in Washington. That's one of the things I love about Wyoming. More than most places, you can go for long stretches here in Wyoming without hearing anything at all from the government, and I love that. And by the way, it's not because we're anti-government. It's because this is a state where we know good government and what it looks like. Wyoming has no debt, we're a producing state, and we have well-managed resources. And you can find a strong public commitment to the basic responsibilities of government. And it's not like we're a one-party system. Over the last 40 years, I think we've had as many Democratic governors as we've had Republican governors. But what seems to set Wyoming apart in the consensus of certain fundamentals is that we do not go to extremes, whichever party we belong to. And it tells you a lot that even now, one of the preeminent voices in spending discipline at the national level is the gentleman, Al Simpson. In both parties, he's got quite a following. And when we hear Senator Simpson's warning about the entitlements and all the rest, that's not just a Republican talking. That's not a partisan person talking. It's the voice of common sense, clear thinking, and Wyoming values. Our country needs those values right now, and the stakes could hardly be greater. That's why we've got to stay engaged, no matter how disciplined we are or how bad things may look. One victory, this election, would not have solved every problem, and one setback does not spell the end of hope and progress. The work will be harder now, but so be it. And it's if our duty has changed at all, it's only to give more to the cause of sparing America from a fiscal crisis. I come at this from a pretty simple angle. I'm a believer in opportunity, and it's made all the difference in my life, and I've seen it make a big difference in other people's lives. Opportunity is my credo, and I like to think it's even in my breeding. And along with many others who wound up in Wyoming, I come from a family that followed the frontier as it moved west. My great-grandfather homesteaded in Iowa. My grandfather and my father were carpenters in Nebraska. Dad had a small business in Nebraska City, where I grew up, and I attended Creighton University on the 9-year plan. Not because I enjoyed college so much, but I had to pay it as I go, so I had to work and then pay and then work and pay. In that place, in that time, things were like that for just about everyone I knew. You had to work to get ahead. But if you were willing to work, it felt like opportunities were all around you. That's the American faith, and it's never let me down. Just about everything I've ever done has come about by recognizing and sharing opportunity. Ameritrade, the whole point was to get away from the narrow idea of an investor class and give everyone a shot. I am such a believer in opportunity that I help my kids buy the Chicago Cubs just so they can have an opportunity to win the series. It doesn't end with business either. I have a nonprofit organization that is, really founded around the idea of opportunity, and it's called Opportunity Education, which takes the best elements of classroom instructions, teacher training, and puts them into developing nations. It sounds simple, but you'd be amazed how hard it is and what a difference we're making in the lives of boys and girls in Africa, India, and other parts of the world. And we see significant changes what a formal education can do for these people. Give them books, iPads, good teachers, and a few other assets, and you can set them on a whole new path in their life. It costs money, but money isn't what we're giving. What we're really sharing is opportunity, and nothing will turn a life or a country around more than opportunity. If you're a believer in opportunity, you naturally want to share it, and in my opinion, there's hardly a sadder sight than a person or a group that has had the opportunity that won't share it. And that's a terrible judgment to fall on anyone, to be accused of being able to take advantage of the opportunity and not passing it on to others. Yet it isn't exactly how we ourselves are being judged and remembered in this country if we pass along only our troubles and our debt. Looking at entitlements we won't reform, debt we won't control, spending we won't stop, can anyone say with conviction that we are doing right by our children? In my season of life, it's my grandchildren I think about the most. We've got to get things right for them, because the course we are on right now is not sharing the opportunity of America. Maybe you've heard this saying by George Orwell, excuse me. Sometimes the first obligation of an intelligent man is to state the obvious. That's where we find ourselves right now. It's obvious that if this nation continues not to get a handle on some of the grave fiscal problems, then a terrible burden will fall on the next generation. That fiscal cliff we have been worrying about come January will seem as nothing compared to the far worse dangers that we are inviting. The President and Congress can carry on like this for only so long. The vote in 2012 has been called the status quo election, but the status quo will unravel under the pressure of current trends. Excuse me. A $15 trillion debt earned us a credit downgrade. What's our projected debt of $20 trillion going to do? What does it mean to the United States? Our very worthiness as a credit risk is now open to question, something we couldn't have imagined quite recently. The rest of the world, our friends and adversaries alike, wonder if we are even serious about handling this problem, and we aren't doing much to help our own case. And it's all treated as a revenue problem by the President and many in Congress. Faced with massive debt and a chronically slow economy, their idea of a solution is to raise taxes. There are many answers to this approach, but here is one conclusive answer. If the federal budget today was in 2001, there'd be a surplus. The revenue of today would more than cover the federal spending of just 12 years ago. So the problem is not lack of revenue, it's lack of discipline. Behind our $1 trillion shortfall is a deficit of political courage, a deficit of political courage. And it's just that simple. For 20 years now, federal spending has gone up more than 70% faster than inflation. A big part of that can be explained by huge increases in discretionary spending, culminating in the epic waste of the 2009 stimulus. But of course, most of the increase has been entitlements, as you well know. Now, entitlements are 60% of our budget. Entitlements are 60% of our federal budget. And that's not even counting Obamacare, which kicks in next year and will cost at least $1.6 trillion over the next decade. Here's another sign of what's coming up. Spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid by 2048 will absorb all projected federal tax dollars. Absent reform or unprecedented tax increase, everything else the federal government does would have to be with borrowed money. That kind of borrowing isn't even possible. Excuse me. Long before that point, thanks, Ron, the size of the economy and a lot of other things would start to give away. They'd start to crumble. Our economy would start to crumble before we even got close. Now, how do trends like this really play out in people's lives? That's what we want to know. What does it really mean to us? Obviously, it sounds scary, but what does it really mean? We know it's not good, and the numbers are big and they're abstract. So I wanted to get some details, and I asked Dr. Michael Boskin, an economist at Stanford, just what an even higher debt would do to the economic growth of family income. And he studied the question and came back with some answers. What happens is simple to state. Higher debt eventually crowds out private investment because holdings of government debt replace capital in private portfolios. That means less private capital formation over time, which suppresses income growth. And by how much? If the percentage of growth of the debt to GDP continues to rise, then by the middle of this century, family incomes per year will be roughly 30% lower than they would have been. So just, the way you can think about it today is just take your current income and reduce it by 30%, and that's all that you have. You don't have that extra 30%. That, among many other harmful things, is what the debt will do to this country, and it's our grandchildren that will inherit this issue. We most certainly owe them better than that. And generation after generation of Americans have worked to make things better for the next generation. This is the first time that we run the risk of going down in history as the worst generation in America. And indeed, the numbers that I just talked to you about show that we can do some good simply by controlling what we borrow and spend, just as every American has done in generation before us. With very little downward movement in the debt curve, good policy can help assure better standards of living for all who follow us. Each major decision we make about spending and borrowing involves a choice about our children and our grandchildren. Do they come first, or do we? Now, no office holder in Washington is shameless enough to reply and say, yes, we come first, and the next generation will have to take care of itself. Everybody says that we're concerned and worried, determined to do something. But as with everything else in life, the measure is not what we say, it's what we do. So you can't believe what politicians say, you have to look at what they're doing. And if we're doing the right things, the trends would be headed in the right direction. America's economy would be growing dramatically instead of America's debt. Yet the impression seems to be that policymakers will do anything and everything to prevent the private sector, to revive the private sector, except so long as it doesn't leave more wealthy and more freedom in the hands of private enterprise. The stimulus 4 years ago was an attempt by the government to manipulate the economy, and it failed just because it was an attempt to manipulate. The same mindset is at work in monetary policy these days with QE3. It's just another case of the government betting that it can increase employment, while in reality it is risking jobs and much more risking this prospect of severe inflation. QE3 is a bad bet, and it's a very sorry stimulus for the real economic activity that inspires investors to invest, employers to hire, and entrepreneurs to take risk. But that's all the Federal Reserve has left because of the fiscal policies in Washington. In my opinion, this open-ended buying amounts to a little more than a gamble that the Fed will be able to engineer a soft landing to tame inflationary expectations. And this policy does threaten to unleash huge inflation. If these efforts do not work, it's the elderly on fixed incomes and the poor who will be hurt the most. A very cruel outcome, a very cruel outcome. With a group like this, like you, I don't need to paint a picture of what real investment growth may look like or the policy needed to make them happen. Nor does anyone here need instruction on the fundamental of debt management and entitlement reform. But knowing what's necessary and doing what's necessary are not the same, and the thing that joins them is courage. It doesn't happen often enough, but when it does, leaders like Congressman Paul Ryan show up. Here's a man who truly brings credit to his party. And though he won't be our vice president, he remains a great force for good. He ran like he wasn't afraid to lose, and that's often how future victories come about. I've held him in high regard ever since that memorable exchange 3 years ago at the Blair House when members of Congress were convened to discuss Obamacare with the president. In terms clear, polite, and unanswerable, Paul explained to the president and the vice president why the program was not a cost saver, but in fact an unsustainable new liability. He was fearless, and that's what it takes. We know from his experience and from just about every other debate on the subject what happens when people candidly talk about entitlement, spending, and debt and the consequences of doing nothing about it. Feared for the truths they tell, such leaders are drowned in abuse. They are portrayed as cold, heartless, and out to destroy the safety net. And the script never changes, while these same critics cast themselves as tribunes of compassion and generosity. Oh, such dishonesty. And so we draw closer and closer to a debt crisis, which when it comes will make today's choices seem a lot less compassionate. Spending away trillions of dollars with borrowed money to be repaid when we are gone by someone else is not generosity. As you know, it's just the opposite of generosity. By doing this, we are not giving, we are taking. We're taking away earnings of people whose lives, much less their working lives, have yet even to begin. Taking away the opportunities that we ourselves, growing up, and taking for granted. On the fiscal course we are following, that is the epitaph of this generation that this generation is writing for itself. And it certainly isn't one to be proud of. It will be said of us that instead of dealing with our own problems, we shifted them to others and left our kids and our grandkids with a diminished inheritance. A lot of us were hoping that a majority in this last election would issue a clear call to face up to these matters while there's still time. I'm not a pessimist by nature. My line of work tends to reward optimism, especially optimism about the future, of the United States. Every serious investment is ultimately a wager on the long-term success of the American economy. And as far as I'm concerned, there's still a wager to be made, and I'll be making it every time. Despair, after all, never gets you anywhere. If you ever feel it coming, and in the cause of reform and responsibility, the surest remedy is always to rise again and stay the good fight. Our country needs us, and I hope that in time we can prevail. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't offend people, but I told you the way I see it. And now I'm open to questions. So I hope we have a lively time with questions.
That was a very good speech.
Well, thank you.
Do you have any reasonable explanation of why the multitude of wealthy people, the Buffetts, Strikers, and you name them, are so enticed with the socialistic viewpoint that is put forth by Obama?
I don't have any idea. I just can't understand what they're doing. Buffett is a neighbor of mine from the days I was in Omaha. He's a nice guy. He does everything well, but when you get him out of business, boy, he just seems like a fish out of water. I just don't understand what these folks think they're going to do with benefiting society with their ideas. I mean, socialistic ideas have been demonstrated time and time again to harm societies and put people in poverty. And why they don't understand it is beyond me. I wish I could answer your question. I wish I knew I could go change their minds. Yes, sir.
I think maybe we've got 3 generations in this room. The elder generation born before World War II, a middle generation, and some that are younger. Could you help us discuss a little bit from the point of view of the older generation, what's going to happen to that next generation which is not going to do as well as we did?
I think that, excuse me, please. We, by example, and I put myself in that category that you just described, and hard work and talking to our children will get them maybe to fight for fiscal conservation or conservative fiscal issues here in this country. I know that my wife and I have 4 kids, and 2 of them are very worried about the future of our country. And it didn't take much talk on the part of myself to get them involved. And I think that going forward, they're probably going to be more involved with energy and time and their efforts than I was. So I think, you know, when we talk to these people about not having the opportunity that we had, about the changes that are coming, what does it require that we change? It requires several things on my point of view, and we need to talk to our kids about this so they can pass on a better world to their kids. It needs to require a change on the part of government for spending. I mean, people need to know that they can get ahead in this world by working, and we need to make those opportunities available. And you do that through the free enterprise system. And the second thing is that we need to change education. You know, when I just told you a little while ago, I put myself through college, but I could afford to. Now, I don't think I could do that today. I think it'd be too expensive. So we need to work on ways so that we can create opportunity for our grandkids along with our kids on education part of it. And I think there's ways to do that. And if you don't mind, I'll tell you a little bit about the project I'm working on for college education. The kids that are going to school in my opportunity education program in third world countries work hard. It's amazing to see how hard these kids work at their studies, unlike anything I've ever witnessed in the United States, because they know the only way out of poverty is through education. Unless you're in the Dominican Republic and next to the Cubs training ground, then you want to play baseball. So I said to myself, anybody that works this hard to get a high school diploma should have the opportunity to get a college education, but how do you do that? It's it's impossible. Here you got thousands of kids that would take the opportunity. So I went to Bellevue College, Bellevue University, which is in Omaha, that is online. And I asked them if they could help me solve this issue. And we had 3 or 4 meetings, and here's what they came back with. We will put the first 2 years of college on an iPad. So the academic materials will be built into the iPad and give it to the student, and that student stays in their village in Africa or India or Nepal, wherever they're at. And they take the test, and then they send that iPad to a city and go to an internet cafe and send us their test results. The 3rd year, we'll have a campus in their country, which I'll support, and the students that got through the first 2 years and got an associate's degree can come to that campus for the 3rd year. And the 4th year, bring them to Bellevue University in Bellevue, Nebraska. And then Bellevue went on to say, you know, we can do that for kids in the ghetto here in the United States. And in fact, we will guarantee a student is automatically admitted to our university if they get a high enough score on the SAT or the college entrance exams. So here you got people in the ghetto that don't have families that can teach them how to go to college or don't even think about going to college, and they're told all you have to do is study and be able to get a good enough test and you're automatically enrolled in that university. It's a stunning development. Then they went on to say, and we will guarantee that they will get a 4-year bachelor's degree in any one of the disciplines that they select, and no more than a $10,000 debt. Now, folks, that changes education in the world. And I can't tell you how excited I was to hear about it. I don't think Steve Jobs understood what he invented when he invented that little iPad, that tablet. But anyway, that's what we're working on right now. And when we get there, which will be 7 or 8 years away, with a college program for kids out of the ghettos in the United States, we'll be able to tell employers and graduate schools this college degree is better than a degree from Harvard, because at Harvard you can get credits for taking pool or for bowling, and you can't do that at Bellevue. So that'll be our advertising motto when we get to that point. But anyway, we've got to make opportunity available to the young people, which means that you know, we've got to have ways of showing them how they can get ahead, and that includes all young people, and not just the kids in the middle class. And we've got to have a government that is going to be responsible enough to make sure that we don't burden ourselves with regulations and taxes that prevent businesses from growing and developing and entrepreneurs from taking risks. So I answered your question the best I can. It's a huge amount of work because it's a huge policy shift. And that's the hope that I take in America. Every other huge problem that we've had in America, we've been able to solve, and we've been able to get through it. And hopefully we'll be able to do this one also with the measures that I just talked, or whatever might be the issue that has to be worked on. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for your excellent speech.
Thanks.
A practical question more related to your Ameritrade business. As you know, with interest rates held artificially low for the last 3.5 years, near zero, many people have invested in dividend-paying large cap stocks, U.S. stocks. And as you also know, on January 1st, the tax rate on dividends is scheduled to go from the current 15% to 43%, either just because of current law or under the president's proposals. So what is your view with respect to what that near tripling of the tax rate on dividends will do to the large cap U.S. stock market and to the retail investor that you serve so well at Ameritrade?
Well, it'll have a devastating effect. I mean, that along with the other issues that economists and politicians talk about, if we don't get it changed, we're going to have a recession, and it will probably be a depression. What I find criminal is that Congress and the President should have done this 12 or 24 months ago. Now we're down to a matter of weeks. So businessmen, for the last couple of years, did not know exactly where or how the economy is going to be handled. So they were reluctant to hire people or to put money into new facilities. It's criminal that our government does that. I think before now and the end of the year, they're going to have to get together, because I think if they don't, I think everybody in this room plus everybody else in the country will march on Washington and shoot them, because we don't want to take that risk of having a severe recession. So I think that they will probably get something done at the last minute. You know, both of them will negotiate both sides will negotiate toe to toe, and I think the Republicans are going to get some help on a little debt increase if the Democrats get a tax increase, and so it's a question of how do they fit those together. So I think that the stockholders are have got to do a lot of praying so that those two sides can get together before this thing happens. But the interest rates need to go back up too. I mean, we're killing retired people who are living on income. I mean, it's just not proper. It's just not the right thing to do. So if we had an economy that was growing faster, those problems would be easier to solve. But in the situation that we've got, all we can do now is hope that before the end of the year there's an agreement between the two, so that we don't go into January without having that problem solved. And I think that they're not going to go up the way they look like they might going to go up. That'd be my opinion. Yes, sir.
I've been a Cub fan for 60 years.
I love you.
And I'm just curious what changes are likely to happen at Wrigley Field to bring a World Series there.
Well, I'll go through the changes that my kids have done this last year. I'll even back up before that a little bit. A number of years ago, I think it's about 6 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, my son called me and said, Dad, the Tribune has just changed hands and they're going to sell the Cubs and we ought to try to buy it. I said, why would I want to buy a baseball team? I don't have any interest in sports, no sports. I just don't understand what you're calling me for. He said, Dad, let me tell you, they sell every ticket, every game, win or lose. I said, oh, you're talking about a business. Now you got my attention. But of my 4 kids, my son Tom is the one that manages the Cubs as chairman, and he wants to win a series so bad that I've never seen anybody with a passion that he has. My other kids want to win a series. Tom has got the passion. And so he took big risk. Last year, he got rid of a lot of the old managers that were around the Cubs, and he got rid of a lot of the old players, and that cost the Cubs about $50 million. We just had to kiss it, he had to kiss it away. Took a lot of courage for him to do that. Then he went to the farm teams, and he looked for young people to come and play, and he brought the young people on. So he's hoping out of all the talent that he brought on from the farm teams and the new young people that he's got, that he and the new manager are going to be able to develop a team that will be somebody that can be contending for this series. But as they've told everybody, you got to give us some time. And I think the public really kind of adopted that. They didn't expect 100 losses. So this was a bad year this past year. But one thing about baseball, you can always hope for the future. And so as you start out the new season, you got to think, well, how are these guys going to be better than last year? This much I can tell you, maybe not before I die, but before my son Tom dies, he'll win the series. When I see so much effort going into something, I know it's going to happen. I just don't know when. So they're working hard, and they took a risk on a lot of young people. So it'll be fun to see how it develops this next season and the season after. Yes, ma'am.
If there's hope for the Cubs, maybe there's hope for our economy too. I wanted to ask one last question on the economy, and I think that policymakers and the people who follow them that are taking us down the wrong path can be lumped into somewhat 2 categories, where they're either ignorant or they're doing it deliberately. And I can almost understand and tolerate, not let it go by, but tolerate it more if it's done on an ignorant basis. But what can we do for those people that really have an agenda and are doing it more on a deliberate basis?
It's difficult for us as voters and taxpayers to understand which ones are just really not very intelligent and which ones have got a policy that takes us in a direction that's made our country successful. I know that there's a lot of people in Congress that are looking to as soon as they get elected, man, they're working on the next election. And that's what they're concentrating on. They've got 2 years to get elected again, and they really aren't paying attention to the big picture. We do have now, and I thank God, a few years ago I didn't see this, but now I see it, young people in both the Congress, House of Representatives, and the Senate that are taking this stuff seriously, and they're being listened to. And I think they will weed out the people that are either unintelligent and don't understand what's going on, or the people that are only concerned about lining their own pockets and their own career. And so when you find those people, whether they're from Wyoming or from South Carolina or from wherever they're from, once you find somebody that you feel is a true patriot, please support them, because they need it, because there's a lot working against them. I use the word patriot, and a few years ago people said, well, Joe, that's not socially acceptable to use the word patriot. I said, well, then we got to change the country. And now the word patriot is socially acceptable in almost every social class in the country. But we do need to support the people that are important. I hate to see Senator Simpson, becoming somebody that's not going to be important. I think he's been important to us for a long, long time. But we do have a problem. I think we had this problem that you suggest in our first Continental Congress. I think we've had it all the way along. I think the way things stand today, but with the economy between the two sides, the conservatives and the liberals, or the Democrats and the Republicans, existed, throughout our history. What we haven't had before is the debt. The debt is what makes it different. The debt will carry us beyond what we can expect to turn around. Someday we won't have any choice what happens to our economy and what happens to us as individuals and our own benefit unless we get the debt changed. But from the point of the question that you asked, there's a lot of hope that that's going to be changed. I see a lot of very good people. Hope I answered that question.
Joe? Bill Schilling back here. I have
Hi,
a
Bill.
question. You referenced deficits. Could you explain and share with the audience what your oxygen deficit was and your motivation for climbing Mount Kilimanjaro?
Oh, the oxygen deprivation was large. I have a good friend. We've been the best of friends since the third grade. And he wanted to climb Kilimanjaro. And there was an IMAX movie at the theater about people that climbed, a group that climbed Kilimanjaro. And there was a young person in there that was about 10 years old. And there was an old person in there that was in the early 70s. And we watched this movie, sort of more like a documentary. And we went out for a pizza and a glass of wine. And the wine turned into a bottle of wine. And we were having a good time. And he said, Joe, let's climb Kilimanjaro. I said, I don't want to climb Kilimanjaro. Oh, come on, Joe, it'll be a good time. I said, okay. Worst okay I had ever said. We got our families together, and we climbed Kilimanjaro. It was not a fun thing to do. It was a very hard thing to do. And I was sick most of the way. And when I got to the top, my children had given me one of these big telephones with an antenna on it that you can use anywhere in the world for Christmas, and told me to call my wife when I got to the top. And so I got to the top at about 9 o'clock in the morning, because we camped down below the top in the previous evening so we could get there early the next day. And I called my wife. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning when she answered the phone, and I said, Marlene, I've made it to the top, but I am incredibly sick. I've got a headache. I've got an upset stomach. I can't keep any food down. I've got diarrhea. I can't tell you how bad I feel. And she said, Joe, it's so fun to talk to you. That was about the end of our conversation. Neither one of us wanted to talk to each other. So we started down the mountain. And you think of getting to the top. When you're going up, that's all you think about. You never think about coming down. Well, coming down was hard because we were coming down the other side of the mountain and we were walking through screes. So every step you took, you slid a little bit. And I'm taking a step with 2 inches, just barely moving. And the guide comes up to me and he says, Mr. Ricketts, you got to move faster. I said, why? He said, we need to get to camp. I said, wait a minute, you don't understand. I'm moving as fast as I can. Every muscle in my body is full of lactic acid and it just won't go anymore. He said, but you got to get to camp. I said, no, I don't. I said, I can see the tree line right down there, and as soon as I get to tree line, I can build a fire and lay down and go to sleep. I don't need any food because I'm sick and I got enough clothes and I got a fire. I'm an old Boy Scout, I know how to build a fire. The next morning you come back and get me. He said, Joe, that's against the rules. I said, I don't care about your rules. I'm not going to make it. You got to understand, physically, I cannot do that. He said, what if I get you a stretcher? I thought he was joking. I said, oh yeah, I'll take a stretcher. An hour later, he told us he didn't have a phone. He did all the way up. He said he didn't have a phone. He did have a phone. He called, two groups showed up, 8 guys with 2 stretchers, one for me and one for my friend. They strapped us in and ran down the mountain and took us home. And I was so relieved. I went to sleep, and my head was bouncing around. My kids were way ahead of me. And my daughter saw me coming with my head bouncing around, and she thought I was dead. And she was quite upset, and the guy said, no, he's just asleep, he's just asleep. But it was one of those things where I was hasty in my judgment and said okay, and it was because of the wine. So I've learned not to do that. I don't think I've ever done it since, that I will commit myself to something when I have a little bit of alcohol in my system. Thanks much, folks.
Thank you, Joe, thank you so much for your comments, but also thank you for the continued work that you do in providing opportunity, as we've heard this afternoon, for so many, especially in the world of education. So thank you so much for that as well. Thank you. Paul?
Okay, well, just a couple announcements and then we'll adjourn for the evening. First of all, hope everyone joins us for a no-host reception just outside here in the Wyoming room. And just a reminder that in the morning, we start a little early, and there will be a breakfast buffet set up out here at 6:45. The program begins at 7:15. So why don't we end with just one more round of applause, thanking Mr. Ricketts for his visit. And with that, we'll stand adjourned. See you all at the reception. Thank you.